Hey, okay. Today I want to talk about concepts around fear. I think we'll start with the ideas of Chinese medicine and fear. So, in Chinese medicine, we consider the channels and the organs associated with channels to have multiple functions. So, each channel has a specific tissue they're associated with, let's say bones, muscles, sinews, tendons. They each have an orifice that they're associated with, or each have certain areas of the body they're associated with, and they each have an emotion that they're associated with. Now, the emotion does not stay just with them, it does affect the other channels in specific ways. But the presence of that emotion in the body is at the right level normal and then can become pathological. So we're talking about fear today, and fear is housed in the kidney channel. The idea being that a healthy amount of fear or apprehension is okay, but excess fear will actually damage the kidneys and further damage all the other organs. In addition, we have to think about two other things in Chinese medicine. They have something called the restraining cycle and something called the engendering cycle. And this is an idea that these channels also have elements associated with them. And these elements have a specific relationship with each other. One is the engendering, in which one element supports the next element. The idea, they call it a mother-child relationship. And then the next one is a controlling cycle in which each element helps to restrain or somewhat control another element. So the engendering cycle runs, we have the metal element that creates the water element creates wood creates fire creates earth, and then earth goes back to creating metal. In the controlling cycle, we have earth restraining water, like the banks of a stream, water restraining fire, kind of obvious there, right? Fire restrains metal, like an axe restrains wood, and then wood, like the roots of a tree, restrains the earth. Okay, so in Chinese medicine, the kidney channel is the water element, and fear is housed in the kidney. Now, one of the ideas that we look at when there is a certain amount of excess fear starting to appear, one of the ways we can control it, we understand this from many concepts, is through rational thought. Now, thinking and pathologic overthinking or anxiety is housed in the spleen channel or earth element. So the idea being that part of the control in that cycle actually comes from the ability to use rational thinking from the earth element to control fear. And then what we understand is that they have something called the rebellious cycle or the insulting, and that's in which the element that is supposed to be controlled actually overacts and attacks the other one. Now, again, we can see this in the idea of fear, in that excessive fear will always override rational thought. And when we look at it from other things we've talked about, that excess fear actually starts to kick off our fight or flight response. It is designed to override rational thought. Now, as well, what we see as another level is that the kidneys, as the water element, actually support the wood element, which is the liver, and anger is associated with the liver. And it's one of the ideas why we believe that when there's too much fear, the kidneys get injured and then they can't support the liver, and then you get a little bit more anger as well. But I wanted to look more in this at how the fear affects us and how we can use it actually to help us. So one of the things they find is that if we've ever looked at the concepts from Seligman, Seligman was the guy who came up with learned helplessness. And the idea of learned helplessness was simply demonstrated in the idea that they would take, I always hate to talk about animal experimentation, but they would take dogs, they would put them in these hammocks. And when they were in these hammocks, they would give them mild electric shocks to the back feet, and the dog was not able to escape this. Now, the original study I forget who did it, but they used that, and then they put these dogs in a box, and this box had a little wall in the middle, and one side they would be shocked, and one side they wouldn't. And they thought that the dogs would have learned that the shocks were so terrible that they would want to avoid them, and then they would jump the wall. But what they found to their surprise was that the dogs actually just stayed there and just dealt with the shocks. Dealt with them. So many ideas came out of this, but then there was Seligman and his people who got together and decided to do the same research, but they played around with it a little bit. Some of the dogs were allowed to have a button that they could touch with their nose, and that button would actually turn off the shocks. So the dogs learned how to turn off the shocks, and other dogs weren't allowed to. And essentially what happened was, when they put these animals in the box, the ones that had learned that they could avoid the unpleasant stimulus would just jump the wall. The other ones would not. Now, some people have argued that you can't teach animals to think, and this is not what happened, but I think they're full of crap. What they have demonstrated is that you can do this with rats, you can do this with most animals, and most likely people as well. In that, if you believe that this unpleasant circumstance is something you have no control over, then the ability to gain control in new situations is very much impaired. So that essentially the learned helplessness from the shocks will extrapolate to the box. Learned helplessness in one situation, especially at formative years, can extrapolate out to many things within an individual's life where they feel that they have no control, and then they essentially become the type of individual who kind of gives up easily. They feel they have no control. When we go back to Chinese medicine for a second and we look at the idea of chronic fear, especially at a very young and formative age, there's an idea that this also affects another form of willpower controlled by the liver and gallbladder, and this also leads to that cycle that we talked about. And that's the ability to be forthright and carry out plans and control your environment, move forward. It's a form of willpower that is housed specifically, they say, in the gallbladder and liver channel, especially the gallbladder. And that this fear from the kidneys impacts this. And then these are people who never feel that they have control, never feel like they can move forward. They're always very timid. They don't take risks. So when we look at these ideas, we do see the same things we saw in the concepts of developmental trauma disorder or the ACE studies, right? The idea that these patterns of abuse, especially in childhood and especially by the caregivers, so whether it's your parents or a grandparent or an uncle, someone who is supposed to take care of you, when they do that, they represent your safety, your ability to control the world. And that teaches children essentially that they have no control over the terrible things that are going to happen to them. And this can create long-term problems. And quite often, that's why physical manifestations come out as well. In Chinese medicine, we talk about it all the time, that you'll see the manifestations of like joint pain, aching joints, weak, painful areas, difficulty with digestion, difficulty with thinking. All these ideas, they come from deep-rooted fear in the kidney channel. However, in Western medicine, we see the same thing in this idea that at these early developmental stages, this level of trauma will cause the individual to feel helpless in all situations. And also, as part of a coping mechanism, these more physical disorders of pain and dysfunction will develop and further reinforce that feeling of helplessness. Nothing I do takes my pain away. Nothing I do, the medications, the treatments, the massages, nothing takes that pain, nothing stops my headaches, nothing stops my digestive disorders, nothing stops my depression. So how can we work with this? One of the ideas, you can get treatment, you can do acupuncture to support the kidney channel, clear the fear, support the gallbladder channel, and that can very much help. It will give the strength to make certain changes. but we still have to do the work to create the changes. And for that, we go back to the ideas of meditation, especially mindfulness meditation. One of the techniques we can do, one of the techniques I've used and found very effective and sort of played around with and came up with some ideas, is the idea of learning to sit with your own fear. You can start with physical symptoms. So let's say you have chronic low back pain, and we believe that might be linked to this sort of developmental trauma disorder. Quite often, the original approaches with meditation were to just kind of breathe into the area to relax it, or breathe and focus on something else so you focus away from your pain. But what we've started to realize is what may be happening is that you are actually reinforcing this idea of the pain being scary. It's terrifying. It's something you have no control over, so you have to avoid it. You have to hope to get rid of it. And often, especially if that fear is so powerful there, when we are trying to even relax the muscle, there's a certain fear that we're not going to, and that actually creates more tension in the area and can increase the pain, and then it further reinforces that fear that we not only have no control, but anything we do might actually make it worse. So, instead, the idea is to take your area of dysfunction, let's say, again, lower back, and you breathe into it. But you don't breathe into it with the idea of getting rid of it. You're only breathing into it to feel the pain, to feel what it feels like, to explore it, to look at it, to examine it, and also be open to the idea of what emotions may come up or what thoughts may come up when we focus on the pain. And quite often we'll find out we've created a whole story, a whole mythology even around the pain. And that has helped to increase levels of pain because we're increasing muscular tension, we're increasing inflammation in the area. A lot of the other stuff we talked about in the other video with the glucocorticoids and stuff we haven't talked about yet will further create more and more pain in the area. The idea is once we start to really meditate with it and focus on it and not try to do anything with it, just try to experience it, feel it, and partially understand it, it reduces many of those defensive responses. The pain reduces, not immediately, it might take a little while, but it releases this. It releases the area, and it allows us to potentially release the stories we have associated with it. And they've also found that sometimes you'll even get to the root emotional states or belief structures that may actually be creating it. And once you get to those and can actually feel them and understand them and hear them and recognize that they're really ridiculous or they don't exist anymore, that the pain just kind of goes away. Now, you still may need some local treatment in the area, massage, chiropractic, some acupuncture, whatever, just to release some of the musculature. You might need to still look at other work, exercise in order to strengthen other muscles that may have atrophied a little bit in order to counteract some of the excessive spasm in the area. But overall, getting to that underlying belief structure is very important. Now, further past that, and this is solely my sort of opinion, I've read some people's work that supports it, but this is work for me. When we look at the history of abuse that people have suffered, there's this sort of Hollywood idea that that it's the memory, it's the experience of the trauma, it's re-experiencing it that is the most terrifying thing. And I don't think that's true. What I think it is the underlying belief structure it creates. And off the underlying belief structure it creates is exactly what we were just talking about, that learned helplessness. But at a level of like, I don't deserve to get better. I don't deserve to feel good. I'll never feel good. Everything I do is just a waste of time. I'm always going to be broken like this. Even worse. Maybe it's even worse than I thought. Maybe I'm a terrible person. I don't deserve to get better. All of those things. That, to me, is what I call the dragon in the cave. Like, that's the beast. That's the monster that we're running from. That's the one that our back pain and our headaches and our IBS and even the anxiety and all the other stuff keeps us away from, is that fear, that needing to give up, potentially that suicidal tendency to just get rid of it. Okay, so one of the ideas then is to eventually you want to find that belief structure. You want to find that cave inside you. And we're going to go inside that cave and we're going to sit, same way we do with the back pain. We're going to sit with the dragon. We're going to sit with it, put our hand on it, look at it, and feel that fear. Because as cheesy as it sounds, it's not the fear and that belief structure that is so bad. It is the fear of that fear that is probably causing most of the issues. So the idea is once you're not afraid to be afraid, it's okay. It has less power over you. And then those moments that you can actually experience your fear aren't as bad. And once we're not afraid of our fear, we don't fear the fear, then we don't need all these coping mechanisms to avoid it. I don't need to experience the back pain. I don't need to have the high blood pressure. I don't need to have all these other issues because I'm okay with experiencing my fear. And that takes some training because we've probably been running away from it for a while. So don't be afraid to sit in that cave with your dragon. Don't be afraid to put your hand on it. It's okay. I think that's it for today. I think that's it. One of the things actually, before I say that's it, because it's not that's it, to think about is you can spot these things in yourself as well if you've thought about wanting to do things to change your life, wanting to stand up to the bully, wanting to stand up to people, wanting to face this, wanting to face that. And every time you get to it, it just stops. And you're unable to push past that. And you're unable to make those plans happen. Most likely, it's what we've been talking about, whether you want to look at it as like an injury to the kidney, chi, and therefore you have this fear, and that's injured the gallbladder's ability to push through and make plans. If you want to look at it as Seligman's learned helplessness or developmental trauma disorder, these are signs that you're dealing with this stuff. If you focus on that pain or on that tense area, and you start to feel all these terrible feelings, and the last thing you want to do is keep focusing on it, most likely that's what we're dealing with. Again, if you like this stuff, like, subscribe, hit the whatever buttons you're supposed to hit. Usually, at least every few videos, I put my email down there. If you want to reach out to me, have any questions, feel free. I'm cool with answering any questions. That's about it.